Well, just want to say thank you for being here today. Just a brief intro on Mandy. Mandy Strens works as the current chapter coordinator for PNHP, where she organizes operations and maintains databases. She also serves as the current events coordinator for a grassroots organization in Brooklyn, where she gathers her community and advocates for their social justice. She attended Reed College, where she studied the Russian and English languages and later taught both. One thing about Mandy is she loves big changes and she cannot lie. And she strives for them as well. She's developed an advocacy fellowship where she trains student clinicians to advocate for a single payer system. She also communicates with legislators in attempts to avoid the privatization of Medicare. Mandy is here today to share her endless insight on event coordination, and we look forward to learning from you today.
That was such a fascinating intro.
I stalked you a little bit for the intro, so I thought I'd throw that little joke in there. For reference, her social media bio was like, I love big changes. I can't lie.
You can tell what generation I was born in. Um, yeah, just one more thing. So I was the chapter coordinator for the New York Metro chapter up until last year, and I've actually started as the one of the national organizers with Physicians for a National Health Program, where I'm working even more on the Medicare Advantage and anti-privatization work, as well as doing chapter coordination and development, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm really excited to see you guys all today. Um, Maybe I'll jump right in and then we can, if folks, I'm hoping to give like a little bit of a presentation, but also I'd love to have a session where we can kind of be productive together and think about like things that we can come out of this and start planning. If you guys have some ideas for events that sound appealing to you, and I'd love to get to know you guys a bit. Then let me just share my screen real fast. Okay. All right. So planning and organizing event. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. And before we even start into it, I just wanted to share this picture. This was actually one of the first events I ever coordinated for single payer. And it was downstairs on like the corner of my building with a bunch of people I knew and even more people I didn't. And I think back on how important like this event was for me as somebody who got into the movement in that space, but also one of the things that I look at this picture and I think about a lot of these people here are people who became part of a community for me. And I think one of the things that's really powerful in advocacy is remembering the importance of like the personal relationships and interaction that you have both with other advocates and community members, and remembering that at the end of the day, everybody around you is also a human with a whole life. And most of them can actually be pretty funny from sometimes. And yeah, just keeping that at the root of when we're planning events or pairing them out or having those conversations, just like really valuing those people front and center. Yeah. Okay, so I think Betty said she was going to send around some materials on outlining an event planning looks like, but I just want to dig into that a little bit and also reorder adapt a little bit to the materials that I think she'd had. And so these are what I think of as like the 7 different steps of setting up an organizing event. We've got our goals, we've got the money part, we've got recruitment of volunteers and co-sponsors, the actual planning, getting people to turn up. That's a big one. Hosting the event, and then possibly even the most important thing is the follow-up. Each of these have a few different steps, and I just want to highlight that I have them in this order. This works really well for me, and it might work differently for you. You might find that your event is going to be a really different thing. And so, maybe budgeting is something that comes right after you design the event. You have a little bit more flexibility, so you can dream first and then find money later. Or maybe you want to be recruiting volunteers and co-sponsors after marketing begins. Everything's very flexible. And I just encourage folks to not, stick yourself into a box. These are guidelines and things that have worked for us. But if you've ever planned a birthday party or a dinner party, you actually can plan an organizing event, and you do a great job. And so before we like jump in even further, sorry, I keep doing this like and before. Curious if anyone has some ideas of different like types, like what I just want to think like what types of events might be interesting to you. If you want to toss those in the chat or just unmute yourself and shout them out. We're a small enough group.
I think personally for me, one of the events I want to host for like our Snap chapter, our med school, because I feel like recruitment and like having our fellow classmates be aware is such an important thing to have more people as a part of this fight. So I was thinking some sort of documentary, movie screening, something like that, and heavily advertising it, um, as an awareness type of thing.
I love that. You jumped right into our next step. I love that. I also want to just say I personally think the movie screening is like a perfect a perfect introductory event. I feel like you end up with a relatively low lift and then you have a conversation afterwards. I think that's a spectacular idea. Um, Chris is saying education-based event on the healthcare process to fellow students. Awesome. Um, Not in med school, work closely with advocates, campus or yep, that's awesome. I love the way you guys are thinking. Okay, cool. So, and just as a quick before one last thing, community presentation on single, I love it. How many folks here are involved in SNAP chapters? One. Okay, cool. So just as a quick understanding, so Physicians for National Health Program organizes with everybody. Our primary focus is physicians. SNAP is the student arm of our organization, and they do a lot of outreach too. So those are just some of the different like organizational aspects of what this could look like. All right, so let's jump right in. I loved Stephen was talking about education and recruitment. I just want to think about goals. So, before we jump into what an event really is, we really want to think about what it is, why we're doing it, like the 5 Ws. This is like really fun kind of to think about. This is the moment where you can like sit down and like pull yourself together and think about the reason that you want to be hosting these events because sometimes we want to just host a social which has its own purpose, but we want to think about what it is that we want. Do we want education and recruitment? Those are two things that I heard Stephen say, and I think those are really great goals. When you think about who the target audience might be, is it other students? Are you reaching out to seniors in your community? Are you planning to go to physicians or colleagues, maybe family members? Even with, you can even go a little bit deeper. Maybe you're part of, who was it? Was it Gabriella was saying student organizations? Maybe you want to work with like the Latino Student Union, or something, when you think about specific groups that might benefit from certain things. And you want to think about, so that's who you're talking to. And this is where you can also start thinking about who might be speaking, or who you might want to highlight for these events. But that'll come a little bit later. It's just kind of something to keep in the back of your head. What it is that you want to talk about. Do you want to focus on Medicare for all? Do you want to, is that your primary focus? Do you want to focus on something more specific? It can be pharmacy benefit managers or something. It can be privatization of Medicare. What is the exact type of campaign? Is there a specific campaign that you're plugging into, or are you doing this as a group or on your own? And also, what type of event is it going to be? Is it going to be a movie screening? Is it going to be a panel discussion? Is it just going to be a social event where you guys talk about those things? All of these have like different purposes, and well, a lot of it will depend on who you're interacting with. Your timeline is both like in what time of the year largely it will have to do. So keeping things in mind, like for example, we're in the process of planning stuff ahead for Medicare Advantage. And when we're thinking about it, the Medicare open enrollment period starts October 15th. So for us, that's really important for us to be like, okay, a target, really important time to be thinking about it is the weeks and the month ahead of October 15th? Or are you trying to talk to folks who are graduating soon? Do you want to have a conversation in April or May before people get wrapped up in graduation festivities? And just really thinking about realistically, what does your availability look like? When are people going to be busy? Do you want to host an event on, a holiday? Or, like usually no, just keeping those things in mind. And so the where of this is also going to be largely connected to who, like who you're trying to reach. If you're going to be doing things on online on Zoom, that's one where. Another where can be a physical space on campus. Sometimes you can do a movie screening like in a classroom. Sometimes you could do a movie screening in a bar. There's all sorts of different things. You can think about like spaces that are available to you. Public libraries have a lot of usually have spaces that you can either rent or have access to for free. You usually have to be very careful with public libraries because you can't have like candidate things, but you can have education. But it's a slightly different conversation. But really think about where you might want to host those things and where might be meaningful. I work again a lot with Medicare Advantage, thinking about things that happen maybe at a senior center. If I'm trying to access senior communities or at like the YMCA or spaces that host programming that might be relevant to the community that I'm trying to speak to. And then the why, right? Again, like that education and recruitment is a big one. Do you want to have it be, or do you want to have an event that is pressuring somebody to make a change? Are you pushing people to turn out to vote? Are you pushing to have an elected official make a stance or a statement? These are all, I personally think the why is largely the most important and will inform a lot of these other questions. And so I just also want to highlight some of the support that's available for each of these things. So on each of these slides, I'm going to have one or two little things. Lori Clark at National, I have her email address up here. She is our SNAP coordinator. So if you're doing a SNAP event, she can help you guys get that out in the world. I personally handle, and she can also help you think through what that process looks like. There's also, each SNAP chapter has an advisor, a faculty advisor, and most states have local PNHP chapters and members who might be open to having a conversation with you to work through some of these thoughts. I've learned almost everything I know from talking to organizers and community leaders who've come before me, and they have a lot of knowledge, and it's always really fun when you get to collaborate and bring your own spin onto something to change that as well. Does anyone have any questions before I move on a little bit? No? Okay, in general, I can only see a couple of you right now because I'm doing the weird double screens. So just yell out if you do have one. Okay. I also just wanted to share this awesome picture. This is an event we did with, we wanted to engage some of the youth. So these are all high school students who were speaking about the connection between health access and over policing in schools. And the fear that came around things and the public and the health impact of over policing in schools. And so we were able to kind of pull together some different ideas, and that took some folks a moment to wrap their heads around, but it was just a really great event, and I just thought it was a fun picture. All right, so jumping into the next step of budgeting and financing, this is number 2. So I like to put this one higher up just because it's easier for me to grasp what my options are if I have a better idea of what my budget might look like. So just thinking about what is available to you. Does everybody who wants to participate throw in $20? Does everyone throw in $100? Do you have folks, do you end up thinking that you need a little bit more budget than you have? Can you find that later? I know, so SNAP chapters get up to $150 per semester for events. And PNHP chapters also will get funding based on their membership dues. So let's say there's 10 people who are members in New York. It's not true, but well, So we got a couple more than 10, and each of them have $100 dues. 50% of those dues end up going to the chapter. So the more membership outreach chapter does, the more their funding is. And so all of that goes through our national staff. Lori Clark and Matt Petty are the two people at the national office who can help coordinate those things. I do want to highlight that for every single thing you do, save your receipts, take a picture of them, set up a Google Drive folder. Just to, it will save you in the long run. Just keep it's always better to do it up front so you don't have to worry about it later, so folks can get reimbursed and things like that. Some things to think about budgeting for. Does a venue that you want to host an event at charge? Like, is it a $20 fee to participate in something? Do you, if you're going to be tabling at a farmer's market, do they charge for a table? Do you want to provide snacks and refreshments? That's, and this is why we wanted to think of approximately how big do we want it to be. You want to think how much snacks and refreshments, how many people are you going to have? Really thinking through. Usually somebody in your network might well have access to like a Costco or a Sam's Club or something where you can get stuff in bulk. That's a great resource if you can find somebody who can help you out in that space. So that's something to keep in mind. Decoration. Do you want to be printing materials? Do you want to make a banner for the wall? Do you want to have like an active component where people will walk away with something that they either to be printed or like that they can participate and build from an event, like art builds, for example, ahead of actions? Those are events that we really have a specific budgeting needs for. Do folks have any other things? Like what are other things that might cost money in organizing an event?
If you want to hand out like brochures or something, like you would need to pay to print them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. Or if some organizations will send them to you, but you have to pay for shipping, things like that. That's a really good one. Anything else?
Transportation.
100%. Yeah, that's a really good one. Do you need to get transportation for you as an individual, but also sometimes if you're going to help folks reimburse transportation for something else? New York Metro, PNHP New York Metro used to host a lot of events up in Albany, and we would have to coordinate a bus, which is a lot more money than you think it is. But transportation is a really big one. Other things like if you're able to, thinking about things like, can you help coordinate childcare if folks are going to be coming out? Things along those lines are really helpful to keep in mind. Okay. Next we have our recruitment phase. So recruitment of volunteers and co-sponsors. So this is really also going to help before you even start planning the event. The recruitment of volunteers will help you know like how many people, what's a realistic plan, because how many people are going to be able to pull it off with you. If it's only you pulling something together by yourself, you're going to have to be more realistic in what your capabilities and capacity are going to look like. If you have a team of 15 people, you have a lot of opportunity to be doing different things. You also want to be thinking about what the different groups could be participating in. So turnout is a really big one. And yeah, so like turnout is to get folks to turn out, particularly when you think about those target audiences that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And it's really interesting for us to think about who's already in your orbit and who should be in your orbit. When I first started doing events, we fell into this like weird cycle where we started hosting a lot of events really regularly, and on our like 4th or 5th event, I remember looking around and being like, I know everybody in this room right now. And like that whole preaching to the choir is such a real thing. So you want to make sure when you're doing types of outreach, you're going to be doing outreach to groups and people that are not just already in your space. And so when you want to be thinking about that with your strategic partners, right? So when you think about and when I say strategic partners, it's like, who is going to promote an event? Who is going to help and fund? That could be somebody who helps with the budgeting, or do they want to participate financially? And when you think about those partners, you want to be really intentional and upfront about what the additional goals they might be, and what you're requesting of them as a partner for an event. Are you asking somebody from a different student group to speak at an event? Do you want them to serve on a panel or something? Are you asking them to do marketing for your event? And do you want help day of setup, breakdown, cleanup? And when you think about that, you want to make sure when you're doing that outreach that it's a two-way street, and that there's something for that other group that they get out of it, whether that be exposure, or sometimes they'll have other goals that they have. So I'm just thinking, for example, again, at New York Metro, we have a lobby day every year. And it's a lot of fun. And we bring people up to Albany, or we've done a lot of them remotely for the last few years. And we partner with a lot of different organizations in New York. And so the New York Metro chapter focuses a lot on the New York Health Act, which is our state-based single payer bill. But when we bring in our partners, we want to be thinking about what are, like, the nurses union is a regular partner for that. And often the nurses union will have other legislation that they're like, this is a priority. If we're going to participate, we want to be including this specific bill. We want to be including something about the importance of safe staffing. Or we have a great partner who does a lot of immigration work, and excuse me, immigration justice, particularly around healthcare. And so their focus is not only single payer, but in the meantime, coverage for all. How do we make sure the undocumented folks in New York have access to insurance and healthcare as well? So when we're having those conversations, we want to make sure we're leaving space for other strategic partners and their goals, and having those conversations up front, so everybody feels appreciated, and like their purposes are being understood and represented. And so when you think about, and like, again, with that capacity conversation, you want to think about what different folks can bring, whether that be, the planning team, would be us on a Zoom call once a week for a month leading up. Or is it people who are just going to come and be the physical labor who does moving chairs around, doing sign in, or those types of things? Or is it going to be the folks who are handling follow-up and outreach after the fact, which we'll go over a little bit more later? But so think about different ways folks can sign in. If people are like, oh, I'm not around that day, that's great. There are roles for you, even if you cannot show up to the event. So just keeping things like that in mind and tracking that stuff in a way that's helpful for you. And you just want to make sure in the rest of this process that you're keeping all these folks in the loop. When decisions are made, when there's change that's happening. So you're keeping people aware. There's nothing worse than finding out, like, the day of an event that you're actually supposed to speak for like 15 minutes instead of the 3 that you had planned for. That is a way to have somebody not participate with you again. Or the other way around, you plan for 15 and you only have 3. Whew. Does anyone have any questions or like things that they might want to add to that? Okay, let's scooch along. So the support there is also, again, other student groups and local PNHP chapters. So thinking about like different campus groups, different local organizations. There's a lot of resources that are available out there. I think and think about national things. So People's Action, a lot of states have citizen action groups. Those tend to be great partners. When you think about local DSA chapters, they tend to have great resources and networks. Think about the groups that you see that are already hosting things or are engaged, and they might be really willing and helpful. And if they can't participate, they might be able to point you in the direction of somebody who might be more better suited to your event. Okay. And now we get to the bread and butter. We're actually designing our event now. Woohoo! We have our money plan, we have our people plan, and we have our goals. So now we get to choose date, time, venue. And so again, like, I think I went over this a little bit earlier about the when, considering not only times of the year, but also times of day. Are you trying to get people who are working but asking them to show up on Wednesday at 2 p.m.? That might not work. Like, when you think of your target audience, what is their availability going to look like? If it's a student group, you might have a little bit more flexibility. If it ends up being But you also want to be thinking about, you know, one of the things we run into a lot at PNHP, people who are like, I cannot do a meeting from 6:30 to 8:30 because that's bedtime for my kids. Sometimes it needs to be later than you think it needs to be. So just keeping those in mind, and having as many conversations about that stuff as you can. Once you land on that time, registering or booking whatever space that needs to be, making sure that you have a space before you make an announcement, because you may land on Tuesday, July 2nd at 7 p.m. Everybody's so happy. And then you go to book the room at the library and guess what? Somebody else already has it. So realizing that those things need to happen in tandem. You also want to make a plan for the space. So like, do you need to find chairs for that? Do you need, what is it that you want? We've had made our goal. What kind of event? What do we need for that? Are we showing a movie? Do we have a screen? Do we have a projector? How many people can we fit in a space? Being thoughtful about those things. If possible, it's really important for us to try as much as humanly possible to cover accessibility needs. There's no way to get 100% accessibility. That doesn't exist. But if you can find a space that is wheelchair accessible, that has easy access to bathrooms, if you have any type of people who can do interpretation, there's a lot of different ways to provide different types of accessibility, and a lot of different materials and resources to help you get there. I'm happy to share some of those after the fact, but just thinking about it as much as you can is something that it's really awesome to keep in mind, particularly when we're thinking about, Medicare for all and what the implication of that really is, and making sure everybody is covered. We want to make space for everybody to be in these conversations. Also, another fun thought: theme, decor. Like, do you want to have a color? Do you want to have it be around, I'm just thinking, I'll show you a picture in a second. It'll give you some theme things. Making a title for an event. It doesn't need to be something clever. It can be. I love a clever title, but just something so that folks know what you're talking about when you're like, oh, that webinar. Nobody knows what webinar you're talking about. That event on Thursday. There's 12 events on Thursday. So just something to give yourself a shorthand so that you can talk to, and you can like refer to and recruit for. Look at me, themes and visuals twice. Love that. Thinking about who your actual speakers are going to be. And this is a really interesting one. You also want to be really thoughtful about, when you're speaking, thinking of who you're going to speak to, who's the appropriate person to have that conversation. Not only the best person who like knows the best, a lot of people have a lot of knowledge, but you also want to think of people who are going to be able to understand what's happening. Sometimes, you can have access to the president of PNHP, who's wonderful. She's one of the best, or he's one of the best speakers I know. But in a student space, maybe it makes more sense to have a student leader who understands the experience of different students in the room, and can speak to what their actual ability looks like at that moment, or their experience in the exact moment. So thinking of folks who can relate to their audience, and who are accessible, and as much as possible, making sure that not everybody looks the same. We've all been to an event that is a panel of 5 people, and they are all older white guys, and it's just not a good look, and it's a really there's a lack of a thoroughness and understanding. Making a space where folks can both not only see themselves but see their priorities reflected is something we really want to make sure is a priority when we're planning events and speakers as much as humanly possible. Making a run of show, which is just a fancy way to say a detailed timeline for the event. So if you have an hour event, thinking about, how many minutes are you going to take for that introductory section of welcome everybody, thank you, blah, blah, blah. And then how many moments does everybody get in between? You got to make sure you leave enough time at the end for like the wrap up, or if you have transitions in between. It's never a good time to like go to an event that you thought was going to be done at 8, and then next thing you know, it's 9:30 and somebody's still talking. We've all been there. We got stuff to do. So we also want to make sure when we're thinking about these events, we're keeping in mind what that capacity looks like. Do you want to have, how many people do you have available for check-in and sign-in? How many people do you have to troubleshoot the weird projector that never works and find the correct dongle? How many people do you have people who are available to make sure folks have somewhere to find the bathroom, or folks who are dedicated to hanging up the decor? So keeping roles for that in mind, and keeping in also, you know, one person can do a lot of those different things. You know, you can do check-in at the beginning, support in the middle, and clean up at the end. That can be a one person's role. But in general, it's also really great to have like one person who's a floater. So that's something to keep in mind. Just, you know, there's always going to be something that ends up bottlenecked, and having somebody who's able to kind of just like run where they're needed is awesome. Yeah, so, and again, in that planning and the designing of the event, making sure those conversations you had earlier with co-sponsors, that you're honoring those goals that they have as well for this event. So incorporating things like speakers or things like that. It's awesome when you can make an interactive event. You know, you can always have a speaker talk at you for a long time. That's not a terrible thing, but people tend to remember and engage a lot more if they're able to participate. So being able, having things like a Q&A is one way to do it. That's probably the easiest, most common, right? But also things like inviting people to share their own personal experiences, or what does anyone here have any ideas for different ways that you could make the whatever event you're thinking of interactive? See, I'm
I've
doing.
used Mentimeters before to make like a word cloud, either on people's way in or on their way out with some like thoughts and reflections.
Oh, I love that. I actually just discovered the word cloud within the last year, and it's one of my favorite things now. What else?
I know some people use like Zoom polls and stuff to like ask questions while they're presenting. I think that's a pretty good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love a poll. Can also make a poll a commitment, because you can export how people respond to those polls. Anyone else before we keep going? Well, feel free to add one or drop it in the chat if you think of anything else. And then one of the things that I want to make sure we spend a moment on here is what your calls to action are for an event. And so when we think back to, again, those goals and that why, we have education, we have recruitment, we have fundraising. So you want to make sure that your goals are very clearly asked at the end of your event, or at the beginning, or 5 times in the middle. But you want to make sure that those calls to action are very clear. For SNAP membership, for example, SNAP membership is free. Ask people to join. It's a really low bar for people to participate. If you're for practicing physicians, asking them to join PNHP, there's different levels of engagement there. Maybe it's asking folks to make a phone call to a legislator on a very specific thing, or to write a letter to the editor. What is your goal? And you want to be really intentional and thoughtful about what the outcome that you want everybody in that room to take will be. Maybe it's to invite somebody to another event. Maybe it's to come to a next meeting. So when you that call to action at the end is really possibly the most important part of your entire event, right? Because that is that's the hook, right? That is how you get people involved. Up until then, you're giving people the information, you're sharing your stories, you're creating community, which is super valuable. But pulling folks from this action into something else is really kind of a big part of the reason why we host organizing events. Otherwise, they're just events, which are also great, but this is where the organizing part comes in. And so again, support here, local PNHP chapters, other groups, co-sponsors. Most of the staff at PNHP, Lori, Clark, and myself are both really excited to do event things. Local PNHP chapters, though, I think are really valuable in this space in particular. They often will have materials, for example, like you have your limited budget, great. A lot of local PNHP chapters already have the signs. You don't need to worry about printing things out. They might already have brochures. so there's a bunch of different things that you can think about, and just also your friends and family are a great resource. Maybe your roommate has a projector that they can lend you if the space that you're hosting doesn't have one. So I think that the designing of the event might be the most fun. And so I mentioned that I would share my theme one. This was the New York Metro chapter marched in Pride last year, or this was actually Queer Liberation March, because in New York City we have a corporatized Pride parade, which is fine. It's not a terrible thing, but kind of reacting and reclaiming the liberatory nature of the original Pride parades. The New York Metro chapter has been marching in this Reclaim Pride event every year for the last few years. And so I think we had a really great time. You could see this banner on the right with the rainbow in it that we made for events with the LGBTQIA+ community. Morgan, oh, I don't have the umbrella. One of our chairs here had designed a spectacular umbrella that says healthcare that covers everybody, but and so just thinking about different things, we ended up with these little, I don't even know what they're called, fans that had rainbow branding, but also had information about single payer on the back. And we ended up with we drafted a really silly little quarter-page flyer that highlighted the way the New York Health Act in particular included gender-affirming care and why it was so important. So just thinking about there are different types of events that you can host. They're not all in a room. And when you have something like a parade, then it's a little bit different. You have to think about communicating things like, where do you start? Where's the finish line? What's the timeline? So it can be a little confusing. But there's a lot of space for you guys to host an event and again have a good time. Organizing events is fun, and it's meant to build community. So yeah. Does anyone have any ideas for other fun themes in their events that they're thinking about?
I think it'd be cool to do a Halloween one because of how scary the healthcare system can be.
I love Morgan, who is not in this picture. She probably took this picture. She's the executive director of the New York Metro chapter, and she's been talking for years about how we should do a Halloween event and have these zombies chasing after people. We actually last weekend in Brooklyn, we have this annual Coney Island Mermaid Parade. It's really a lot of fun. It's kind of a weird event. And this year, the chair of the New York Metro Board, Dr. Betty Collard, she organized a group to do some march in the parade and do some street theater. So we had evil insurance corporation pirates. I was evil Mermana. We had United Fish Care, and then we had these sad nurse mermaids. And we just went through and had single payer chants and handed out literature that was on theme for mermaids and pirates and stuff. It was a lot of fun. And we had some really great conversations. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can do those things and make them joyful. Anyone else before we move on? No? Okay, sweet. Feel free to drop it in the chat if something comes to you. Okay, marketing, possibly one of the more important parts of this process. So, I mentioned earlier the experience of hosting an event and realizing that everybody in the room was somebody who had already been to one of those events. Not an ideal outcome. So basic at marketing, you want to make sure you announce the date and the time and the venue so folks know where to go. Ideally, it's great to make a graphic. A square is best. I know sometimes different things call for different shapes, but a square ends up being pretty universal. So that's the one that we usually recommend people do. Sometimes it's helpful to have a QR code for registration on there if it's going to be printed out. If it's not going to be printed out, don't put the QR. If nobody's going to scan the thing on their screen, it's just not going to happen. But you can shorten a registration link with a bit.ly. If you've ever used one of those before, you can make a free account and it can just say bit.ly/ whatever short link, short term you can use. So that's an easy way to put a registration link on a graphic. And so registration is actually incredibly important. It's one of the things we overlook a lot, but it is your best opportunity to not only get folks contact info, but also any information that you are looking to gather about them. If you're trying to find out, if you're working with doctors, if you want to find out what somebody's specialty is, if you want to find out if people live in a specific county, think about back to the goals that you had in mind. What are the outcomes? What are those calls to action? And think about what the important information you need to know about people is. Do not forget their name, email, and phone number. I've sent out a form recently and I forgot name and email. And I was like, what? It's useless to you then. But yeah, so making sure that you get that information as much as possible. I use a Google form for it. If you're doing a Zoom event, Zoom registration, you can personalize in a lot of ways. They have the built-in options that you can put, city, state, occupation questions, but they do also have custom ones where you can ask people to like share a story about the healthcare system or things like that as well. So registration is the way that you're going to be able to do follow-up and recruitment after the fact. So make sure you get that information as clearly as possible. You want to get the registration ahead of time, but also make sure that you're able to get that information on site as well. So when you have a sign-in table where people are checking in and somebody decided to bring their friend, get their friend's email address as well. You want to make sure folks who I'm a procrastinator. Sometimes I forget to sign up and I just show up to things. You want to make sure you get their information as well. If possible, you want to aim for at least a month's heads up for notice. I know that's not always a possibility. That's a roundabout goal, but that lets people put things on their calendar. And when they find out that their neighbor is having a housewarming party, you'll already be on the calendar. So just that's something that's good to aim for. You also want to make sure that the co-sponsors who are participating, they're also sharing it with their networks. If you're on their email list and you don't see it, it's totally fine to tap them and ask them to share it. Sharing it on social media that way is awesome as well. So your networks, but also trying to find other spaces. So like, is there a SNAP mailing list? Absolutely, you should mail to that. But what about the larger student council mailing list? What about local groups that are working on immigration or abolition work that might have similar values to you? What about people you met from that comedy troupe a couple weeks ago? Don't limit your outreach to people you already know support single payer. Yeah, those are absolutely people you should invite, but particularly when we think about things like education, we want to talk to people who don't already know what we're saying, right? So don't be afraid to invite your family and friends. You're not going to hound them by inviting them once or twice. I have gone through that. They really don't get mad unless you are really, you can hound them about it too if you want, but 1 or 2 invites is totally fine. And yeah, think about, the study group that you're working with or your trivia team. We wanted to do a trivia event a couple years ago and it was like right before COVID, and then COVID hit and we had to cancel trivia night, single pair trivia. But yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that you can kind of reach out to different groups of people, and you want to be really intentional in that. So that's something to keep in mind. And you want to send a few reminders. You have your notification, your first announcement, your save the date a month out. Sending out like to your mailing list says if you do 1 a week, that tends to be a pretty regular good distance. Then it's only 3, maybe 4 emails total. Make sure to send one, like the last one, either day of or day before, just so folks have a reminder. So things are at the top of their inbox. If you're doing a Zoom event in particular, it's actually really annoying for a Zoom meeting, but if you go into like the registrants, you just can click resend their confirmation link so that and you have to do it one by one, but even if it's like a couple hundred people, it only takes a couple minutes. And that way people get that link at the top of their inbox one more time. So that's really helpful to do day of. Yeah, and so some of the resources that are available. So I actually manage PNHP's events calendar. I'd be really happy to put any event that you have on that calendar, so that folks who are around the country in different spaces or local can find that. Lori Clark is our SNAP coordinator, so she helps with SNAP communications. Dixon is our graphic design extraordinaire. Honestly, you can totally do a graphic. Canva is a great tool. You can do the free version. You don't really need the fancy paid one. But if you do need support, Dixon is a resource, as well as the Snap Media team, who have access to one of the paid Canva accounts as well. But yeah, feel free to reach out if there are any questions that you have about marketing. Does anyone, before we move on here, does anyone have other thoughts about like outreach and marketing, things that you think would be helpful for other people to keep in mind?
I mean, me and I know Kaya on the call too. We both worked in residential life together for a bit. And something that I've learned from my work there is like making people feel like they have a personal invitation. If you have the time to reach out to people directly and be like, hey, I know we spoke about this. I'd really love to see you there, can be like the extra oomph to get them actually showing up to an event.
That is an awesome point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's like the advanced skill set. But when you think about specific people in your network, like in general, people you really want to come to the event, make sure you are giving them that one-on-one invite. And to spill some trade secrets, make a template email, put their name at the top, change one sentence, but you don't need to like reinvent the wheel for everybody. But sending somebody something directly as opposed to like a CC list of 200 is going to make them feel more thoughtful. Shoot them a text. But yeah, that's a really great point. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Now we get to hosting the event. Now we get to actually host the event, right? Give yourself enough time for setup. I think that has been my biggest personal learning. Do you need to hang signs up? Do you need to set up the projector? Do people need to put on a costume? Do you think about all the process? And should be stuff that you put on your run of show for yourself as reminders to be like, this is something I have to do. So you can check it off. When things start happening, you can get a little like excited and the adrenaline kicks in a little bit and it can make you forget certain things. So just make sure you have like a checklist of all that stuff that you want to do ahead of time and you have enough time to do that. That's also something to keep in mind when you're booking a venue. If you book a venue starting at 5 o'clock, maybe start your event at 5:30 or 6, so that you have that appropriate amount of time to do that setup while other people aren't already coming in the door. When you finalize your run of show, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be doing the night before. I'm just going to tell you that just happens. Things change. You have a great idea 2 days before, and you should incorporate it. Just make sure that you share the final one with volunteers and organizers. Not only that, if there is a change, make sure you call that out and say, Kaya, I know that you were working the check-in table, but actually I would love it if you could do this instead. Just so, because people are probably not going to read the whole thing in detail like you are. They might, but it's not something that you necessarily want to rely on. So if there's a big change, just make sure to communicate that if it's in the last minute realm. You want to make sure to have a registration list available for check-in folks. That can be printed, it can be on an iPad, it can be whatever works for you on a computer. I personally love to have it on what's it called, Google Sheets, so I can just check things down, and everybody can be updating it together. But whatever works, just make sure again that you have space for people to sign up. That can be physical. That can also be that same registration Google form that you were working on for the whole time. They can be using that right at the check-in desk themselves. Just make sure you're catching them. Yeah, again, like make sure every volunteer knows exactly what they're doing, what they're expected to be doing. And it's awesome to have a person who's like kind of on top of those things. Like I said, that can be the person who kind of floats around. If you have an extra person, just making it's awesome to have a timekeeper who can kind of make sure everybody's moving along really well. Oh, I just said that about the floater already. And this is a fun one. How does everybody want to communicate together? So this is important in person, obviously. Also this is helpful for, I should have said this earlier, actually. It's helpful for the planning part. So you can update those changes when they're happening. If somebody has a question or last minute they're unable to make it, it's great to have a space that's dedicated to those types of communications. But also, if you're doing a virtual event, you want to be really thoughtful about how folks communicate. If you're going to have a big group, are the presenters going to look at the chat? A lot of them don't. I'm just going to tell you right now, a lot of them don't. So when you need to tell them to wrap it up, they're not looking at the Zoom chat. They're really not looking there. So you want to figure out what it is, how people like to interact. Do people have Signal? A lot do now, but still some don't. WhatsApp tends to be pretty safe. A regular old text thread. Just having a way to communicate, or also at the end of the event, somebody forgot their hat. Whose hat is this? You just want to make sure you have those random things around. They can also be really awesome to share the photos that you should be remembering to take. So if you have, a WhatsApp, and again, I'm plugging WhatsApp, they should pay me. Because I prefer a WhatsApp or a Signal, because if you have, I'm sure you all know the war between the iPhone and the Android users and the way your photos shrink on the regular text thread. But yeah, if you have a WhatsApp group, everybody can share their photos and videos and can have them in one space, and it's really helpful in that way. And yeah, have a good time. Like, again, these events are meant to be fun. You're meant to walk away and feel proud. You're meant to have had conversations with people you didn't know before. And honestly, you guys got it. It's really, if you've ever participated in hosting a birthday party or, a housewarming or something like that, you're totally fine. Anyone have any questions about like things that they should be thinking of on the day of the event? Okay. This is just another one for fun. We actually had in Brooklyn, this is weird for me to remember sometimes. We had a forum with the Brooklyn Borough president, who is now the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams. What a weirdo. But he at the time was open to talking about single payer. And we ended up having a borough-wide event at Brooklyn Borough Hall, the City Hall in Brooklyn. And it was just really great. We had a bunch of people who came into our movement from that event. I'm looking at these people, and a lot of them became leaders in our space. And we had a lot of people who were participating. You can see some of the different, actually, I guess you can't see in the background, different signs from partners. It was just a really powerful thing, and people felt really good afterwards. So like, I hope you guys wrap up your event and everybody actually is smiling like this, because that's the way it should feel. All right, and so now the other most important part of an event is the follow-up, right? So ideally, it's great if you can have your follow-up planned before the event ever happens. And you don't want to like finish your event and then have your like kind of adrenaline crash and be done. You want to be able to like have that plan ready for you, so you don't have to think about it after the event. Minimal things you want to have, or like at the minimum, you want to have a follow-up note to everybody who registered, even those who didn't show up, because I definitely register for things when I know I can't show up because I want the recording. If it's a Zoom event, you want to include things like recordings, slideshows, information about the speakers who were there. And in particular, you really want to make sure the information about those calls to action are there, highlighted in some way, shape, or form. Like that is, again, the big takeaway. If there were questions that you guys didn't get a chance to answer, like or that you didn't have the answers to. You know, sometimes people have really weedsy questions, and you don't need to be a super expert and understand every single financial detail about single payer and how it works to host one of these events. It's totally fine during a Q&A for someone to ask a question and you to say, that's a great question. I will look into that because I don't know that answer. That's actually been a really helpful way for me to learn a lot more about different bills and things. People ask questions I never even thought of before, and that's how we're all learning together. But you want to make sure when you don't have the answer that you're able to either figure it out or find somebody who can help answer that and tell the person who asked it. Recruitment, right? So ideally you want to invite people to join PNHP or SNAP, but also to like participate in future meetings. Is there going to be a planning meeting for another event? Are you going to have, is there a different speakers activity, different like forum or a different type of event in general that you want people to participate in? Again, this is something you really want to be thinking about with your partners as well. Do they have things that they want to have you guys following up with? One of the things that, similar to what Gabriella was saying with one-on-one invitations, one-on-one follow-up is also really powerful. So you have these conversations, you know, you'll have your 3-minute conversation on the side of something and you'll be like, wow, when I talked to Nirali, she was so cool. And maybe it's worth having folks do really specific one-on-one conversations to get people to actually participate further. So this is where you're able to kind of say like, Nirali, like what did you find engaging in this event? You know, what led you to participate? Do you have some background? You know, you want to learn about these people too. Again, like movements are about people and the relationships between them. And you want to just make sure that communication feels personal because it should be. And, you know, we often talk about, you know, corporations have money, we have people power. And one of our biggest strengths in people power is that we have each other and that we're watching out for each other and we really care about each other, right? And so building those relationships is really one of the really most beautiful parts of kind of these events. You get a chance to meet people and then you want to continue those friendships and relationships. So that's something, if you can identify a few folks who can be really thoughtful about that, or people who just mentioned they had great conversations, get them to bring them in. And those pictures that you took, make sure you send them to us. I want to see them. They make me happy too. And we'd love to celebrate them with you. And if you ever want to have like a debrief conversation, I forgot to put that on here. It would be awesome if you have a debrief conversation with both your speakers, your volunteers, anybody who was participating in the planning. Sometimes it's helpful to have 2 debriefs, one like directly after the event, so you can have fresh thoughts. Oh, we didn't have enough cups. Oh, we didn't, you know, think of signs to point people to the bathroom and nobody could find it. So which are immediate things that you could take note of, and the next time you do an event, you improve it. And then sometimes it's also helpful to do another debrief, you know, a couple weeks after you've started follow-up to figure out, you know, we had 6 one-on-one conversations afterward, and 2 of those people want to participate and join our group. Or like what type of actions are people taking? So just giving yourself time to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, what you can do better, what was most fun, what was most boring. Like, but you really want to just think about those things and try not to take anything too personally. Nothing's all that precious. And you know, it's all a learning space and we're all learning things together. So again, so Lori is the SNAP coordinator and I'm one of the national organizers. Well, we're actually technically both national organizers, and we also have a third on our team, Rebecca DeLay. She's wonderful too. But please, like, I would love to see and hear about your events if you host them. So send us some pictures, give us a summary. We'd be happy to include you in like the PNHP newsletter about the great work you guys are doing. And you know, I personally find a lot of inspiration from seeing what other people are doing. And that's kind of why I'm trying to share these like stories and pictures with you of fun things that we've done, because maybe you'll have something and be like, ooh, mermaid parade. Well, locally we have this parade, or solstice event or pride's this weekend, or we're all building on each other's ideas. So something that you share could inspire somebody else too. So it's important to own your successes with that, and to share them with folks. Organizing can be really joyful, and I just hope you all take that away from that. Okay.